Okay, we are ready. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Monday, May 11th, 2020, Montgomery County Council meeting. We're going to begin, and I'm going to ask the clerk, Madam Clerk, do we have any changes to our agenda?
Good morning. Yes, we do have an addendum this morning. The council has added to the calendar point 5, consent calendar, introduction, special appropriation to the county government's FY20 operating budget, Department of Housing and Community Affairs, COVID-19 response, $4,399,899 for CDBG-CB and ESG-CV HUD CPD funding, source of funds, grant fund. Also, the council has deferred item number 4, community grants and MCG cost sharing. That will be rescheduled for 5/12/2020. Thank you, President Katz. That's all.
Thank you very much. And of course, as we know, 5/12/2020 is tomorrow, so it's rescheduled for tomorrow. Thank you, Madam Clerk. We need a motion to approve our consent calendar.
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Navarro and seconded by Councilmember Reamer. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item that we have is several items that Councilmember Albornoz on the operating budget, the FY21 operating budget work session. And the first one is the Department of Health and Human Services. And Councilmember Albornoz, if you would please lead that for us.
Thank you, Mr. President, and belated Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Hope everybody had a restful day. It was beautiful, and hope everybody got to enjoy a little bit of that outdoor time. So I want to begin by just acknowledging the incredible work, the absolutely incredible work of our county's Health and Human Services Department all the time, but especially over the last 2 months. My colleagues and I have had the benefit of getting updates periodically from HHS regarding their operation. And much of the work that has gotten the headlines is straightforward, related specifically to COVID, but a lot of the work has not gotten a lot of the headlines, but is equally as important. Supporting our nonprofit sector, expanding services internally, administratively, and creatively to meet the unique needs of providers, and really continuing their work on the front lines in a large and significant ways. And so I want to thank Dr. Crowell and his entire team, and by extension, all of the community-based organizations and nonprofits who contract through the Department of Health and Human Services and are doing their best to hold the line on our social safety net and be able to move us forward. They are all heroes in my book, and I just want to start from that space and acknowledging that incredible leadership, and I know all of my colleagues share the same exact sentiments. I also want to thank Linda McMillan for once again putting together an extraordinary packet, and her decades of experience on the council are invaluable for all of us, particularly now as we're going through this unique process in the manner in which we budget, not having been able to meet as committees. And so, Linda, thank you for your dedication. The headline here is that a number of the recommended items not included because of the very reasonable and correct approach we've taken with regards to continuity of service are painful. Because as we know, many of these issues directly cross over into the county's response and will be important moving forward. And so just as we have with other critical functions within county government, I just want to lead with the headline that a number of these issues will be revisited as quickly as possible once we have a better sense of what the fiscal outlook looks like and what exactly we are dealing with in terms of the response to COVID and how we are addressing those social safety net and public health issues that we know have already arisen and are only going to grow moving forward. And so there will be a lot of disappointment in the short term from a lot of important stakeholders and partners in this discussion. But as we go through these line item by line item, the headline I again want to underscore is we hear you, we understand the concerns and the issues you are dealing with, and this council stands ready in partnership with the executive branch to address as many of those issues and as quickly as we possibly can. So I just wanted to sort of share that up front. And with that, I now turn it over to Ms. McMillan to walk us through the packet. And there will be one item in particular among the ones that have been recommended that we not move forward, that I will be moving that we do move forward, which I will better explain as we go through the respective line items. But Ms. McMillan, and the last thing I should say is normally the HHS committee would have met about 8 or 9 times to go through this entire packet. And so obviously, as is the case with all of the respective committees, this is, we've adapted to the times, but just to acknowledge and underscore that context as well. But Ms. McMillan, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Councilmember Albernaz. Are you all able to hear me?
We are. We can hear you.
Okay, great. I want to reiterate what Councilmember Albernaz has already mentioned, but also to remind people that the council has also been addressing many of the health and human services needs through the series of special appropriations that you have already approved, and those have been for things like financial assistance, food, housing, hospital support. So the council is dealing with these different than we have in past years, but is paying attention to all those issues. And I know we will revisit many of the items in this packet as soon as possible. So with that, I would just say that the FY21 executive recommendation for the 2 funds, HHS has a grant fund and a general fund, is about $348 million. I would just start actually a little bit on the backward side, which is to say that in terms of a continuity of services framework for the grant fund, council staff is not recommending any change from the county executive. The grant fund is about $87 million. It has an $8 million increase. Your packet does show the changes in the grant. The state and federal grants are an important funding source for the county, particularly in the behavioral health and crisis services area. They often move in large amounts because they can cross over fiscal years and have an appropriation that crosses over, but they reflect what the county either has already received or expects to receive. And so continuity of services, the council staff recommendation is to approve the grant fund as proposed. And that leads us to the changes in the general fund. Council staff took a pretty firm approach to continuity of services, and so is recommending a $9.8 million reduction to the general fund to have continuity for the continuity of services framework. On page 2 of your memo, there is a listing of those things that are not included in a continuity of services framework, and I think these are many of the issues that HHS Chair Albernaz already has alluded to, that the HHS committee would have discussed over multiple work sessions and that have been very important to the council over the years. And those have to do with things like providing services to the developmentally disabled and adult medical daycare providers and the nonprofit contracts, wellness centers. We can talk about these as much as the council wants to. They're also not included in the continuity of services recommendation are some substantial increases to to funding for services to end and prevent homelessness, to provide additional capacity for the strategic plan. And so I would just say that we can go through those as you like. I would point out for you that within the continuity of services budget recommendation, there is a $2.9 million addition to the HHS base budget, which is from community grants being moved into the base budget. That there is a listing at the last 2 pages of your packet of what those grants are. I know that tomorrow you'll have a broader discussion of grants, but in this budget, it is a substantial dollar addition, although they are grants that previously were in the non-departmental account but administered by the Department of Health and Human Services. And also within continuity of services, just to highlight for you, because the provision of food is such a critical issue, there is $100,000 as the county match for the summer supplemental SNAP program. With that, I think I would like to get your thoughts about how you would like to move forward with the specific items in the packet.
Thank you, Ms. McMillan. What I'd like to do is begin by focusing on that second page you referenced, which I think succinctly gives an overview of those items that were not recommended move forward, but were recommended in the executive's budget proposal, and highlight several of them in particular, and certainly entertain any questions that our colleagues may have regarding any of those respective items. So that will be sort of the first phase. And then in a second phase, if there are any items not on this list that my colleagues would like to highlight or bring to the attention of all of us, then by all means, we should certainly do that. But I wanted to start with what Ms. McMillan just discussed with regards to our developmental disability community. Last year, the council did put back money that was not recommended to be moved forward to help supplement and support organizations who have had to pay staff. And as the county has phased in the higher minimum wage, which is absolutely the appropriate thing to do, and I think a model for the entire region and the rest of the country, but understandably that has created some challenges within these respective organizations, because the rate at which they are reimbursed for their services is set on not the county's minimum wage, but is actually set at the federal level. And so it puts those organizations in a disadvantage in being able to carry out their services. And so through a partnership, the county has moved forward the ability to supplement those funds to ensure that those organizations are made whole and not disproportionately impacted because of the critical services that they provide to this very, very, very high needs and special population. And so there was a recommendation in the executive's budget to expand that to include the fact that there is the next phase of that minimum wage to be implemented in the upcoming year. And understandably, we've heard from organizations within the disability space who are concerned if those funds are not added, that not only will they not be made whole, but they've had to expand services because of COVID and expand the hours of operation to meet the demand, but also to increase their staffing capacity because they've had a lot of staff get sick and not be able to report to work. And so they've had to increase staffing in order to address that. Because of the continuity approach, we are not recommending right now, right today on this date, that this be included, but this absolutely will be one of the items that we revisit in June once we have a better picture and understanding of what the fiscal situation is. And so I wanted to highlight that item in particular for my colleagues because I know it's understandably generated a lot of discussion in the community among these incredible providers. And I wanted that message to go out to our providers that this will be revisited. So that's one. The second issue I'd like to bring to the attention of my colleagues, and this one I would like to move that we consider to be added to the list for discussion at the end, And for context, we have discussed that items that draw the straightest line between staffing issues and COVID response would be items that we would consider. And you can argue very much, and that's why it's going to be a priority, that the disability community is directly related to COVID. But there is an item that I think is of particular concern, and that is our school health nurse program. There is a proposal for an addition of 10 school health nurses. And as my colleagues know, the school health nurses have been something that this council has supported extensively over the years. And in fact, we were able to place through a special appropriation funding to bring us to a higher level within this past fiscal year. We know that our school health nurses do a lot, but as schools reopen, and whatever that looks like and whenever that may be, our school health nurses are very much going to be on the front lines in tracking, students and whether or not they and the impact of students potentially having the virus coming to school. They're also going to play a leading role in terms of how each school individually responds to this crisis. And we know that a number of our school health nurses, by virtue of their jobs and by virtue of where they are in terms of categories of being within at-risk populations, as they go down, if they get sick or somebody in their family gets sick and they're not able to report to work, we were already in a compromised position from a staffing levels even before COVID. And so very much like the discussion we had early on in this budget process with our firefighters and the support for the possible support for moving forward the firefighter class, it's a similar issue with our school health nurses. And so for those reasons, and then finally, our school health nurses right now are working with our public health office and being dispatched as part of the rapid response teams within nursing homes and by extension group homes. And so while school is not in session, our school health nurses are just doing an absolutely fantastic job of addressing the needs of our community. And so I wanted to move that we restore the school health nurses and not go with the staff recommendation, but go with the executive recommendation, acknowledging that this is something that will have to be reconciled and revisited. And it could be that we look at a fall start date for these positions, but onboarding them as quickly as possible, I think, is going to be very important to our overall response.
Second.
So, thank you.
Second. Yeah.
And so I open it up. I turn it back over to you, Council President. I will come back to discuss some other items, but on this specific item, I defer to you to facilitate the discussion.
Thank you very much, and I'm not surprised that you have a few other things to say. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the proposal and all of the significant work that the HHS chair and HHS committee, many other council members have put into a number of these critical issues, and Linda McMillan in particular as well. I did just want to raise, and I do hope that we can come back to this significant conversation about the impact of the minimum wage on our DD providers, adult daycare providers, other nonprofits in particular. I really do think it's critical that we come back to this important topic. I think we have to recognize that this does have a significant impact, that major commitments were made to these organizations, that as we work to lift up workers in the county, which is a very important and laudable goal, that we not do it at the expense of the most vulnerable in our community and those serving the most vulnerable in our community with these organizations. Now is not the time to discuss that, but I think it's important that it be raised because it is very relevant to this particular conversation. And so I appreciate that that was briefly noted by Councilmember Albornoz, and I think that it's very important that we do come back to that particular item. I also think that there are a number of issues within this packet and within these organizations that we make sure that we make the organizations whole for the grant funding and services that they are providing on behalf of the county, and we make sure that there aren't circumstances where we do a continuity of services budget, but do not put our organizations in a position to be able to afford to maintain a continuity of service, particularly for those who are most vulnerable in our community. I think that's an ongoing conversation that we're going to have as we complete this budget and as we move forward into June and beyond. And I just hope that we all commit, as I know we will, to fleshing out that conversation and making sure that our critical partners serving our residents are made whole and are allowed and empowered to provide the critical services that they do on a regular basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you, Councilmember Albornoz, for your great recognition of, I think, what is going to be a part of our rebuilding structure when it comes to our schools. Look, with over 163,000 students throughout the system, it is one in which there's no question, however we return to school, health is going to be paramount, and these nurses are going to be on the front lines of identifying and making sure that we're staving off any kind of infections in our schools. And so from that perspective, while this is just the small tip of the iceberg when it comes to what we'll need, I think we're going to need much larger teams in our schools. So this is just a down payment on what I think is going to be a much larger iteration of what we'll need to really make sure that we're keeping our students and our faculty and staff that are in our schools safe. So from that perspective, I completely support it. I think that, again, it's going to be key for us to really build out a robust strategy of how we respond in positive cases in our schools, you know, all of those kinds of things. And so that will come, but this is the first step in that process. So thank you, Councilmember Albornoz, for recognizing the importance of this.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do want to highlight that in our conversations about continuity of operations, we did say, and it's in the resolution, that we would take consideration and give consideration to those areas that are directly related to COVID-19. I think it's very true, though now we're thinking ahead on what will take place. So I want to remind everybody that, to me, the HHS budget in particular is going to play an outsized role in how we manage the continuation of this crisis, but also as things begin to open up very gradually. And we should figure out, again, I assume at some point we're going to be briefed about the $183 million, but we need to have some conversations about how we're treating these HHS items for further consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I want to thank the committee chair for his incredible work on everything related to HHS at this time, and also for this recommendation. I think this is a good one. I think we're gonna find that school health nurses, you know, we're appreciating a significant value in having more school health nurses that perhaps we hadn't imagined a year ago. But having the ability to have a very broad community response to a health crisis, it's supported by the more health personnel you have. So I agree with Chair Rice's comments that we're going to have to do a lot more. Obviously, hopefully we can fund a lot of that through the COVID funding, but you know, yet another value here in our school health nurses. So I definitely agree with this recommendation.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too want to commend Chairman Albornoz for the thoughtfulness in the approach for which we look at the HHS budget and everything that is in it. A lot of these things are leading indicators of issues that we know that we're addressing now, but we'll have to address a lot more moving forward. School nurses is one of those issues as we try to figure out what the new normal will be in our educational institutions and MCPS. Some of the other items that are going to be discussed, you know, are also regarding rental subsidies and housing needs, which are front of everybody's minds as well. And some of them don't necessarily square with the same services budget, but as was just said, they are most definitely COVID related, as the anxiety and economic situation right now continues to manifest. And so with regard to the school nurses, absolutely support that. But there's, this isn't going to be an ongoing conversation for sure, because of the huge nature of this department and all of the important work and social safety net items that it provides our community. So thank you.
Thank you. And I too support this. And I also obviously applaud the Councilmember Albornoz for a lot of reasons, not just this one, but especially for this one. We have said all along that school nurses are very, very necessary, and that we are certainly have shown that by our supplemental. And as far as the coming back in June for the developmentally disability community, I think it is very necessary that we have a definite date that we're coming back in June. The minimum wage for Montgomery County starts July 1. We need to make certain that our communities are whole. We said we would do that all along, and we need to stand by our commitment as well. And this is a continuity of services for that community. What we're doing is saying that we will afford them the additional funds when it is necessary. And with that, I have, I think, no other speakers for this topic. And if I'm wrong, somebody's going to jump up and down and let me know. All those, it's been moved by Councilmember Albornoz, seconded by Councilmember Rice. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is Councilmember Reamer. Are you frozen again?
He is frozen.
Frozen again. Same thing.
Well, unless I hear from Councilmember Reamer, since he spoke in favor of it,
Yeah.
I'm going to say his vote will be in the affirmative. I have a feeling we will hear from him shortly. That carries unanimously. Thank you. And we're going to turn to Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also want to mention, and I'm going to, in 30 seconds, give the floor to Dr. Crowell, which I should have done at the beginning, falling victim to choosing the view of only seeing my colleagues. But in a second, I'm going to defer to Dr. Crowell to make some comments. But I want to also stress, similar to the developmental disability community, adult medical day providers are going to be are already a critical resource. But I think moving forward, as we look at the nursing model and the model that we currently have in place, particularly with our older adult populations, we're going to have some very difficult conversations moving forward on the practicality of that model in light of everything that's happening right now with COVID. And adult medical daycare providers are a tremendous resource, but will be even more so moving forward, I think, as an important solution to provide critical care to our aging community. And they also will be, when we come back in June, will be very much a part of that conversation as well. But with that, apologies, Dr. Crowell, I should have turned over to you at the beginning of this discussion, but would like to do that now. And thank you once again, sir. I know you're not sleeping a lot these days, but I really appreciate your dedication and would like to defer to you to make some opening comments.
Thank you, Councilmember Albornoz and Chair Albornoz for the committee. And good morning, everyone. Let me start by saying a heartfelt thank you for all the support and all the hard work. I know that I am not the only person who is losing sleep and working 7 days a week in this process. So one of my staff members commented that every day now feels like Tuesday. So it is, and looking for the weekend, and it just never seems to come. We just roll from one thing into the other. I want to also thank you for the vote you just took on school health nurses. I think that they are going to be a vital piece of what we do in the coming year, and an essential element of what we do as we bring all of our programs back online and deal with our children and the impact that this has had on them, and try to get back to some sense of normal for them. I think I want to also say that this is not how I envisioned spending my first year as director of the Department of Health and Human Services. I had this other thought on my mind about access navigation, effective and supportive staff, and an equity and a model for equity across the service. Those are still my touch points. And it's been both, whether we're in emergency and through recovery, those are still my touch points for what I want to get to and the things I want to work on going forward. I need to recognize some things in response and dealing with this response mode that we've been in. The work of public health, the service area of public health, it doesn't need much comment from me. You all have seen that work and know daily what they are doing in public health, what Dr. Gales and his team are doing in public health. But I want to call out Ceph for the work that they have been doing on homelessness and housing and keeping folks in our shelters safe and protected from infection and COVID. And not only, when I say Ceph, I'm talking not just about Ceph, but the partners that we have that we're working with. It is a vast array of folks that are making this work for us, not just the folks in the department, but I've got a team that are really doing amazing things. Our aging and disability staff have been really on the front lines of working with folks in nursing homes and in DD communities. They have done a fantastic job and are now joining with Dr. Gales and doing contact tracing in some of our congregate settings. The Crisis Center Behavioral Health have stayed open. We have a team that has stayed up in the corrections space, one of the most impacted spaces in county service in terms of positive cases of COVID-19 and congregate facilities. Our Office of Eligibility and Support Services under Joanne Barnes has continued to work, and I will show you something in a moment that I wanted to share with you about that. But the doors are closed to the public, but the service is far from closed. Folks are online and calling in daily. Our Children, Youth, and Family Services are still doing work on getting out emergency cash assistance and constantly trying to make sure that the communities have access to what we need. Office of Community Affairs is working with our Public Information Office to make sure that our communities of color are being reached and communicated with. I think that, and we've got staff from all across the department working with the Food Council to make sure that people don't go hungry and get fed. There is a lot going on. You all know a lot about that. I think what feels like many months ago, we started en masse teleworking. And that would not have been possible without the effort of our IT teams that have been working behind the scenes that people never see and never get a chance to say thank you to. But they have been really busting their chops to get our people out the door. 1,800 people in Department of Health and Human Services, 1,700 people in Department of Human Services. 80% of them are out telework. And as a result of the work that this team has done and the staff, we are really at a very low level of folks who've been exposed and had to isolate and quarantine or been positive. So I'm incredibly proud of the work that they have done and will continue to do in response to COVID-19. I also want to just say one other thing that this, as we look at recovery, and I think I want to share my screen for just a moment if you all will indulge me. Let's see if I can do it this way. This one. And push that all the way up like that. There we go. This is something one of my staff members put together that looks at 2019 versus 2018 volume since we shut down. And what you see across the top end of this is we're the first wave of what I think will be a surge of need coming across HHS's desks and through our doors. Our emergency support services, the need for public assistance benefits are soaring. It looks like when you look down below the red line, the things are less than last year, but that has more to do with the things that we've put on emergency status, on an emergency footing, than I think the need. And I think we're going to see that climb as we go forward into this year. So as the health surge declines, what will increase is going to be the surge of human service needs that we can expect. I am a couple of things, and I'll stop because I think we're going to go through this package, but there are a couple of things that I wanted to point out and just raise. Councilmember Albornoz has talked about the DD and the adult medical daycare requests that are in this line items that are in this proposal, and I think there are a couple of things that I want to share with folks. One is that there is you're also considering not supporting a 1.5% inflationary adjustment. You're talking about the no increase to DD and adult daycare providers. Minimum wage is going into effect on July 1. You've heard. I think the other one is that we're talking about adding additional providers. I think that's in your packet as well, which would mean that the existing subsidy would be further split across the existing array of providers. And then the last piece of this is that Governor Hogan vetoed SB 796, which means that the process for going into LTSS and a change in how they are paid at the state level is going to make that an even greater challenge for these two groups in particular. These add up to a functional cut in folks that are doing work on front lines in congregate settings and in communities where we are at great risk. I think the adding all that combined, plus the difficulty of recruiting and retaining staff in an environment that is increasingly risky because of COVID-19 as we go into the fall and into winter seasons, is something I would ask you to consider. The other pieces, as we get to it, are the rental subsidy pieces. I'll say it now, we can talk more about it later, but I think we are also looking at it for folks who are at risk of losing homes, losing their spaces, because they've lost jobs. These subsidies sometimes are the thing that keep people on the margins, in housing. They have not been increased for a significant period of time, and that needs some consideration, as does our effort to do rapid rehousing to get folks out of shelter and back into housing as quickly as they can. I think the idea of a continuity of services budget is an important one, and one you all have to take, a position we have to take. I would say to you that this pandemic has exposed some critical cracks in our healthcare service field, in health and in human services fields, that are going to be with us for a while and need some repairing. A continuity of services budget in this regard is a risk of reduction and risk of perpetuating some of those cracks. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop on this, is that as you think about the DD and adult medical daycare providers, recognize that revisiting this in June may be timely, but they're working on their budgets for next year now. And they have to work on their budgets, assuming minimum wage increases and all the things that I've mentioned come July 1, which means they will have to make some decisions. They're making decisions now about how they will manage this process going forward. So a delay in that may be more costly than we realize. So I'll stop there. And again, I just want to say thank you to you all. This is a lot of hard work, and this is an unusual budget cycle with some painful choices that council has to make. I realize that, and I think that there's a need to take a scalpel to this process as you think about what you need to support and what you cannot support going forward. Thank you.
Dr. Crowell, thank you so much for those comments. They were so important, and the context, again, for our key stakeholders that are out there is that we know that those decisions are being made now. The challenge is reconciling a number of moving pieces within this very large operating budget relative to just about every department and agency that's out there, and monitoring revenue coming in with potential savings. And that's why continuity of service is a baseline. But as we've acknowledged publicly, and as Councilmember Navarro has said, probably better than anybody, that this is a baseline that we are going to adjust as necessary as quickly as possible. And all of the categories you just mentioned are among our highest priorities to adjust once we have a better sense of what that picture looks like. And so we're going to work this week on putting on the calendar as early in June as humanly possible, addressing each and every one of those items. But because there are so many challenges right now, we want to give ourselves the flexibility of being able to do that once we have a better sense of the environment that we're working from. So I want to assure those organizations that they are at the top of the list in terms of priority, and we will be revisiting it as soon as humanly possible to give them as much runway as we can in order to plan for the future. But we are here to help, and we will help. But you raised a lot of very good points. There is one other line item that I'd like to discuss, Mr. President, before turning over to my colleagues to discuss any of the other items that are on the list for discussion. And I know rental assistance is one that my colleagues have also wanted to talk about and move forward. But there is a line item specifically for trauma-informed programming, specifically for youth. And I just want to highlight that there is some really incredible work going on right now, both within the Recreation Department as well as our Street Outreach Network, and reaching those particularly vulnerable and at-risk youth populations. And so there's overtime work going on right now to address the needs of our youth. And we're always concerned about that from a positive youth development standpoint, but in particular now. And so I know my colleague and friend, Councilmember Navarro, is working on a special appropriation specifically within the youth development space to help address this issue, which I know we are all concerned about. And that particular line item with regards to trauma-informed youth, we're envisioning be combined with that effort. Not ready for prime time yet, but I just wanted to highlight for that my colleagues and put an asterisk on that is another item that we will be revisiting and have a game plan to address in the very short term. With that, Mr. President, I will defer to you and see if any of my colleagues have any additional comments with regards to this second page of the budget and the items that have not been recommended by council staff be moved forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Councilmember Albornoz, thank you for bringing up and highlighting that particular item. As it was mentioned earlier, we are all trying to navigate the different approaches to this budget, recognizing the continuity of operations, but also recognizing that there are particular challenges happening in real time. And I believe that this is one of those areas where we can combine forces to provide that support and do it through a special appropriation, because it is very much tied to the COVID-19 response. So I appreciate your flexibility as well, and also want to shout out Street Outreach Network and all the nonprofit organizations working out. They are in the community right now, providing extraordinary support that sometimes we don't hear a lot about, but they're out there doing it. And that is a very important safety net component for our youth. So as soon as we get some language, et cetera, we'll be sharing with all my colleagues working in conjunction with you, Councilmember Albornoz, so that we can also respond to this very pressing need. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to add my voice to that choir, that obviously it's needed. We need to come back as quickly as we can. And Street Outreach is an unbelievably good organization. And we also have so many nonprofits, and all of us can shake our head when we talk about Identity and all the other organizations that are saving our youth literally on an hourly basis. So we need to come back to that as quickly as we can. With that, I have no other speakers. Councilmember Albornoz, did you want to make a motion?
I would. I'd like to move that we move forward with the staff recommendation with the amendment specifically regarding school health nurses, with the acknowledgement we're going to be revisiting all of this as soon as possible.
Thank you. And is there a second? I see Councilmember Rice giving that second sign. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Who are in favor? Those opposed? That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Next is, I believe it's the Councilmember Albornoz, Councilmember Rice show. The next item is the early care and education non-departmental accounts, and I believe that's a joint committee. Councilmember Albornoz, would you like to lead it off? And
yes.
Rice, I know, will not be shy. Yeah.
No, yes, Mr. President. So Councilmember Rice and I did rock, scissors, paper virtually this morning. And so I will be just facilitating the first part of this discussion, and we'll turn it over to him in a second. But as we know, this council has been extraordinarily supportive of early care and education. And last year, under then Council President Navarro's tenure, in partnership with the executive branch, we were able to initiate what I think is an extraordinarily important strategic plan to get us to a point where we can provide early care and education to every young person in Montgomery County. And we know that this is an economic imperative. We know this is a moral imperative. But particularly now, as we transition back to life, whatever that will look like, it's going to be even more important for us to have critical services in place to support employees who need to get back to work and to help begin to address what we know has been created over the last few months and will be extended into the fall season, which is a gap in the learning that is currently occurring right now among many families. And so for all that and many more reasons, it will be important for us to continue this momentum. And I'll now defer to my colleague and friend, Council Chair Rice, and I'm sure Councilmember Navarro and others are going to have something to say about this too, and then turn it over to Vivian to walk us through the packet. But Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Chair Albornoz. And certainly when it comes to Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Reamer, who have been very passionate about early care and education, I really want to highlight the great work. You know, Councilmember Navarro has been in this space for a very long time that preceded her career here on the council. And so certainly defer to her in terms of her expertise and experience. But let me just say this. This is one in which I had said at the very beginning, we're going to have to come back to. There's no question that any type of recovery plan is going to involve early care and education for not just our first responders, but as folks get back to work. And we're going to need to make sure that those who couldn't afford it before are kept in mind when we have this new iteration. I mean, it's just a no-brainer. And so from that perspective, although it's painful to see us not doing what we had planned to do, the reality is we're going to have to do more than that. So, you know, the 1.4 seems great in the sense of that's what we were looking at as a modest way to keep us moving forward and expanding opportunity. But the reality is we're going to have to have a very robust way in which we're responding to the need that's going to be out there as we try and get folks back to work here in Montgomery County and this region and in this nation. And so from that perspective, you know, I feel very comfortable in moving forward with the recommendations that are here, understanding that in just a short period of time, we're going to address this on a much more holistic level altogether anyway. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you very much. I just want to note, similarly to what has already been said, thank the leadership that's been shown for the previous council with Councilmember Navarro and Councilmember Reamer, who have really been pushing this issue, and the two chairs, Councilmember Albornoz and Rice, who really demonstrated their leadership on this joint committee. I know a number of us have been having ongoing conversations throughout this crisis as we talk about Health and Human Services and the cracks that have been there the whole time, but have been amplified and expanded perhaps as a result of the vulnerabilities that have been demonstrated. Childcare is a perfect example of that, unfortunately, as Dr. Kroll mentioned earlier. And you know, I just wanted to note that you know, as we have previously really been focusing on the subsidies for families, which is critical, we now have a whole new challenge of making sure that there are actually organizations for those families to go back to. And there are some existential threats as a result of this crisis that threaten the organizations themselves of being able to stay operational and stay in business and make sure that we have facilities and organizations that can stay afloat in order to provide the type of early child care and education that is necessary. And so as part of this conversation, I know many of us are working on it. I look forward to being able to work together as a council and come up with a comprehensive solution. But I think we need to think really holistically about this issue and not only implement the really important plan that was put forward last year under Councilmember Navarro's presidency, but also reflect the new reality that we find ourselves in that has really challenged these organizations to make sure that we can keep them in business, keep them afloat, and make sure that they are there for the families who increasingly are going to need them. As we've all said before, this is not just a moral issue for our children and for our future, it's an economic issue. We can't get our economy back to recovery unless all of our residents can reach their economic potential and can go back to work, and that requires a really robust early child care system that is healthy and is working and is functional. and that's going to require significant leadership from this council. We've shown it before, and we're really going to have to show it as we move forward.
Thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. So in hindsight, obviously, last year under my presidency, I had a number of areas that I really wanted to tackle, things that I've been thinking about for a very long time. This Early Care and Education Action Plan, which is different than a strategic plan, but this is an action plan, was also part of the impetus for the Economic Development Platform. In other words, I think that the work this council did to put forth important frameworks are going to be very useful now as well. I mean, nobody obviously envisioned that this was going to be happening right now in terms of this pandemic when we were doing that work. But I believe that that framework is going to help us. And all the comments thus far have been spot on. The reality is that we are going to have to do so much more in this space. It is very clear that things have shifted considerably. And there are particular centers who are struggling or don't know if they're going to come back. Let's think about the family childcare providers right now who are absolutely in trouble and the need that will be there once we start reopening. So I think that this is one of those items that we would do it. We would not do it justice if we just adopted, what's there right now in the budget and the operating budget. But I do believe that and I heard this week, we would be briefed on, the CARES Act and how to use that money, et cetera. I think this is going to have to be such an important component. We need to, number one, take stock of where we are, what has been done thus far. I have questions about where we are because we did ask for updates that had to be, consistent to understand if we were meeting our goals. I think we need to take stock of where we are and then have, again, a very quick, I believe, process to figure out how we boost and enhance what we were doing thus far. So in some ways, I would say it's semi-good news because at least we do have frameworks in place, but we need to make sure that we focus on this razor sharp. This is going to be a component that is going to be critical for the economic recovery and also for the safety of these children, which is something that does keep me up at night, knowing that there are so many children right now who are not in quality childcare settings. So anyhow, I do agree with both Councilmember Rice and Albornoz. I look forward to helping out in any way as we now re-envision this particular action plan and put it into action immediately so we can help recover. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you so much. Appreciate all the comments so far and the work that is ongoing. Just to add to the conversation, I really think we need to create a grant program like the Public Health Emergency Grant Program, but one that's just for childcare providers. And we need to get them enough funding now on the front end of this recovery so that they can, confidently plan to open. I think probably the dilemma a lot of them are going to have is they have no idea how many of their students or their children are going to be re-enrolling. And we don't know, unemployment is high and people may not enroll their children in early education if they don't have employment. So it's going to be an extremely uncertain environment. And, anything we can do to provide funding on the front end, I think will really help them accelerate. So I'm eager to see a child care recovery strategy as soon as possible. I was actually hoping we would see some details here today, but we can follow up on that soon. But I think whether it's forward funding, all of the tuition vouchers that they may have planned to receive, or simply just providing a grant fund. But as Council Member Navarro said, if it's a home-based provider, that's their own mortgage that possibly that is on the line right now. Or if it's a center, then it's a lease, maybe a larger payroll. So there's just a lot of issues, and I think we need to really move quickly and with some significant funding so that our providers can reopen with confidence and to support the workforce. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other speakers. Council members Albornoz and Rice, would someone like to make a motion?
Before we do that, I apologize. Once again, I did not give Dr. Crowell and now my understanding, Bibi Ortero, an opportunity to make some opening comments. And so I'd like to defer, Mr. President, to them to make some comments regarding this particular item. Dr. Crowell or Bibi, please.
Thank you, Councilmember. I'm going to turn this over to Bibi for a second because I know she has a few things to say about this and has been really very much in the forefront of working on ECEI. But I would say that all the things that I said to you all about the DD and the adult medical daycare provider and staffing and operation apply, I think, to our childcare systems as we go forward. The plan and the action plan that Councilmember Navarro mentioned is a sound action plan that got essentially blown out of the water by COVID and the shutdown of childcare systems across the county. I think the challenge now for ECEI is to go back to the table and recraft what does it look like under recovery? What are the staffing issues? How are we going to get folks staffed back up, keep folks in business, but also even get families to a point where they're comfortable bringing their children back into the system? How do we train or retrain providers to deal with healthcare issues and safety precautions in a room with 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds where they are used to interacting up close and personal? All those things are going to have to be rethought as part of ECEI and our expansion for ECEI. I don't know whether or not it fits in the CARES Act funding or whether it's a FEMA issue. I feel like as I listen to this, we've spent the $183 million about 4 times over. Or allocated it for spending about 4 times over. So this is an area that, as I think about recovery and health and human services groups, will be getting some special attention from me. And I'll be working hand in glove with you all and with Bibi. So that's our 2 cents from HHS. I'll leave it to Bibi to follow up.
Ms. Ortero.
Muchas gracias. It's good to see everybody. So let me add a couple of things to what Raymond said, and both at a local and state and national perspective. So you can imagine we're not the only ones that are struggling with this in Montgomery County, and this is really. I did provide Vivian a couple of articles that I hope she shares with you all, sort of at a national level of how people are thinking about recovery for early care and education. I think those are really helpful in trying to think about what are some of the initial steps around that. I think Raymond just said it very clearly that we don't know what parents are going to want. I think Hans, you referred raised that issue. We don't know what parents are going to be comfortable with. We don't know what they're going to need and want, depending on how the workforce rollout happens, right? In terms of people teleworking versus going to work, and whether parents, what safety measures parents are going to want. We have some idea from what we're seeing in the centers across the region that are providing essential employees childcare, and we are looking very closely at how those centers are working and how they're responding to the need and how they are. And what additional requirements those centers are having to put in place in order to make sure that parents, children, and staff are safe. And it is a huge amount of, I will walk you through a provider who walks in, a teacher who walks into the center, changes all of her clothes, puts them in a locker, puts on a uniform that is provided by the center that is washed every evening. That's just the teacher, right? The reduction of the number of children in a classroom so children, the saddest part for me was, and I spoke to a provider this weekend, little 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds who have been taught to say 6 feet apart, please, to their peers. Just the psychological and the developmental issues around that are huge. So there's, I could just layer on that all of the kinds of things that we're going to be dealing with the recovery. And you've heard me time and time again in these presentations talk about a business model that's broken. Well, that is not the ideal. And we're now seeing this nationally, that this childcare business, the way that the business of childcare functions is really broken. And I think there is an opportunity. And the opportunity is to see, do we do this and how do we do this differently? Childcare subsidies are, I think, going to be something that is going to, fortunately, for some of us who've been advocating around this, are going to make way for childcare contracts, so that folks have a contract as opposed to a set of subsidies for a number of children, because so many of our families now are going to be in need that we can't afford to have centers. Centers can't survive on 5 or 10 children being subsidized because they're at the lowest ranks of the economy. So I think there's a lot to think about. There's a lot of work being done. So we're being really good about staying focused on the national level and a regional level. I had regional meetings this past week, so that we are, like many other services, we need to be in sync, because if we stand up a bunch of childcare and other parts of the region don't, are we going to have a flood of people coming into the county using our care, and vice versa, right? So we have to be in sync with the region, just like we are with so many of the other. And I'll stop there and answer questions as we go through, and any issues you have, I'm happy to respond to.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Ortero.
Thank you.
Vivian, did we miss anything from the packet?
I do have Councilmember Navarro that wanted to speak.
Oh, sorry about that.
Councilmember Navarro?
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Otero, for your comments. I think, yes, we've been hearing a lot of stories, and this is kind of like uncharted territory as we move forward. I wanted to also say to Dr. Kroll, that it is true, it's interesting, this $183 million, there's so many ways in which we would like to prioritize using it. We're in a bind. The council received a budget that was prepared way before the pandemic hit, and the budget was predicated on property tax increases and things of that nature. And so, as we very quickly realized we were going to be facing some very, very stark, uncertain fiscal times, we also had a budget that we understood very clearly our residents could not endure. And so we're doing whatever we can, but I think that the good news is that the council is pretty much on the same page about some of these very important high priorities that we will, park for now, and then have to make some decisions. It is true. I mean, we have no idea what the fiscal situation is going to look like in 2, 3, 4, 5 months. We have no clue, but I think our residents should, rest assured that this is one that we have worked on so hard, and we still deem to be, a priority as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice President Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to Gabe and Nancy for their leadership on this issue over many years. Bibi, I apologize if you said this, but I was taken by your anecdote about the teacher changing into the uniform at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. This is all regulated largely at the state level, of course. Who at the state level is coming up with protocols for, cleanliness and of the centers, of uniforms, of all that, so we have a window into the future? I've actually received a number of questions about this as providers and other private companies that are in the space are interested in figuring out what the world of the future looks like.
I think and others please chime in. I think the primary piece we've been looking at, and I think that MSD is also looking at, has been the guidelines from the CDC and HHS. And I'm happy to send, so Vivian can distribute with you the guidelines for childcare and summer programming type that have come out that are sort of being used as the base for making some decisions around cleaning, sanitizing, group sizes, those kinds of things. Much of what we do is driven by at the federal level by HHS, because so much of our funding comes out of the CCDBG dollars. And so a lot of the guidance is coming from there in terms of of utilizing. It was also a lot of the guidance about how to use those resources, obviously has come from the state, from the federal government. And I have to say there were some very positive things at the very beginning in terms of how to utilize those resources, and guidance to states to be much more flexible, which is what has allowed us to be more flexible with subsidy dollars in terms of continuing to pay providers if they were already receiving subsidy, even though their enrollment may not be, children may not be enrolled. We've done the same. So we've mirrored ours the same with our WPA, for example. We've also supplemented some of what was in place for childcare for essential workers. But basically, it's the HHS and the CDC guidance that we're all following.
Okay.
And some centers, of course, some places are adding their own, right?
Right.
Their own.
But voluntarily.
Right, exactly.
So providers and their contractors, it'd be fair to say they, if they are able to follow CDC and HHS guidelines, they shouldn't expect another layer of protections or mandates coming from MDH or from MSDE.
No, they shouldn't. Now, that said, we should consistently be in sync with our health director and what he believes are the right steps for us to take. And so I think that it's the combination of all of those. The baseline is what we're getting at HHS, and then we have to do what we think is best for our community, and based on what we get from our health director.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz, it's back to you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Yao, was there anything that we missed or that you'd like to highlight from this particular packet?
Just to reiterate, just so we have it in front of you, again, the continuity of services budget was about 5.99 million. The executive recommended 1.4 million above that. Of the existing appropriation for fiscal year 20, approximately 1.6 million will roll into fiscal year 21. But it sounds like having that information, it's ready for a motion if members are so interested.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would then like to move that we move forward with the council staff recommendations in the packet for a continuity of service budget.
Second.
Councilmember Rice has seconded it. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item is Children's Opportunity Fund. It's my understanding that this was also joint committee. And I don't know who did the rock, paper, scissors. No one told me. So should I turn it to you, Councilmember Albornoz, or should I turn to Councilmember Rice?
I beat him twice, so I get to go a second straight time.
Wow, I want to know your secret. Yeah, thank you.
I'm not very good at that game.
That's right.
I can see that.
Thank you, Mr. President. This will be brief because it is also a continuity of service budget. I just want to underscore, I happened to be there during the development of the Children's Opportunity Fund and have seen its evolution, and the reasons for its existence remain in place. There is this sweet spot where all of the youth serving organizations within different county branches of county government make significant policy decisions, but sometimes are only come together in relation to the budget. And so there was a need to create an organization that helped establish a common denominator, both with regards to policy, but also to better leverage private sector dollars where there was an investment in this kind of a work. And among the many things I've enjoyed working on with Councilmember Navarro, this was one of them in the development of this. And I do want to thank Kimberly for her partnership and her alliance. And I think this is going to be, the Children's Opportunity Fund is already doing important work, but that infrastructure, I think, presents some unique opportunities as we respond to COVID and the growing needs in every way imaginable. And so I'm very supportive of their work and really appreciate her leadership, and know that this will be an important tool moving forward for us to creatively get out of what we're seeing right now. And with that, I'll defer to Council Chair Rice to make any opening comments as well.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to be incredibly brief. I'm just happy to be in the room where it happened. And so certainly when it comes to Councilmember Navarro championing this, I was just really happy to be a part of that and able to vote yes and support her initiative, which I think was incredible, based, if I remember correctly, based on what we had seen that was happening down in Florida at the time. And so I don't want to steal any of Councilmember Navarro's thunder. I just really want to thank her, because some of the outcomes that, as a result, I mean, we wouldn't have 2 schools that are now slated to go to full year of school if it weren't for the Bell program that was specifically came out of our Children's Opportunity Fund. I mean, there's so many successes, so many things to where all pieces are working together. And that's the collaboration that we need. And that's what the leverage and power of a Children's Opportunity Fund can do. So thank you, Councilmember Navarro. It's always great to be working with you on things that we know are changing the community for the better. And so I'm just really happy.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Councilmember Rice and Albornoz and Ms. Rasnack for all her work in this particular project. It is true that this was created in order for us to begin to test some different strategies, specifically to leverage private funding, with the caveat that it should be, these should be projects that are of quality, have an evaluation component, and also are scalable. And that, I think, has been something that we on the council have been very clear about, that the importance of scalability is critical. Also, it was a way to practice if we ever would get to a dedicated funding stream for early care and education. And I feel like with the early care and education initiative, we have been pretty steady in ensuring that we would add money every single year. And the idea was that the Children Opportunity Fund can begin to be a place where we could practice what governance would look like if we were ever to move to a private-public governing structure. I will share, and many of you have had conversations, that of course MMF has been talking about how they can play that role in the near future. And these are things that we all are going to have to grapple with. The only thing I will say about this year, because of what we are all doing, is that I personally would prefer that whatever funds we're going to appropriate, that they go to continuity of services. In other words, to expand and enhance whatever we've done thus far. I am a little worried about starting new programs because, again, I feel like here we are talking about this macro issue of continuity of operations and only really focusing on those things that we know are COVID-19 related, recognizing that the impact is really hard, right? So if we talk about the Bell program, of course, it was an amazing partnership with the Rails Foundation, something that I helped facilitate with Josh Rails, had extraordinary impact, and it was private-public. It was amazing what we were able to do. So I personally am very interested in continuing in that vein. I think I expressed to Ms. Rasnack via email that I was not interested in really supporting new initiatives, small initiatives, because right now the need is so great. If we do have programs that have been already deemed to be of high quality and high impact, I would prefer that we invest dollars in pursuing and expanding that kind of approach. I feel very strongly, and I always have, that here in the county we're really good at funding a lot of little programs, but rarely do we really commit to scalability when it, and things that have been evaluated. So that's my only comment. I am not opposed to appropriating the dollars, but I would not support us starting new programs at this time. As I said again, I would rather us invest and leverage funds to expand those that are working, because our children specifically right now are going to need a lot. So that's my position, and I don't know how this fits in the recommendation from staff, but that's what I would like to share with all of you.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to my colleagues for all their great work in this area. I just wanted to say, Ms. Resnick, I think this public-private partnership, the idea of COF, what you've already been able to do, and bringing new experience to the table to expand and to really hone in on literacy like you did this year. I was so proud to participate, as I know many of my colleagues did, in the Reading Across Our County, Read Across America Day. That's going to be so important now. And every day I think about these students that some of which are not going to have any or very little instructional learning or reading, or people reading to them. If in the case of their parents, if they're working or essential workers, which we know are disproportionately our children of color and our low-income families. So the idea that we hone in on literacy at 3rd grade as that key marker is going to be so important. So I'm really happy that you're doing that. I think we need to double down on this funding, the leveraged capacity of working with great organizations in the private sector and raising money there. Community Foundation has worked really well on that. I think this is going to be a huge piece of what we need to do to come out of COVID. So I just wanted to thank you for what you've done. I know you know what you're doing and in your team, and we'll be very happy to support this funding. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Albanaz or Councilmember Rice?
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to turn it over now to Ms. Resnick, if you'd like to make some opening comments with regards to the COF, and of course, Dr. Crowell as well, if there's anything you'd like to mention now before we take up the vote.
Sure. Thank you all for the time today. So I appreciate all the kind words. The Children's Opportunity Fund was created a few years ago by the leaders around this table, and I think right now, thinking about the COVID response, school closures have caused an unprecedented challenge for parents, teachers, and students and administrators. And it's exacerbated the already deep divide in educational equity in our county. And so even the most well-intentioned efforts to try to address low-income students during this time is going to be challenged. And so the Children's Opportunity Fund really stands ready to work with the county council and the school system and other stakeholders to address these challenges moving forward. I hear what you're saying, Councilmember Navarro, about not really wanting to start anything new. Last summer, we adopted a new literacy focus, which is really focusing on birth to 8. There are 4 pillars in that: early care and education, community, family, and health. And so what we are proposing to do with the summer dollars related to kind of the carryover from the Bell program is really think about extended learning opportunities and supports to children throughout Montgomery County, especially those reaching out to families who are low income and Black and Brown students in our community, because we really are concerned about the COVID slide. And we're working in a coordinated effort to approach students and families through a trauma-informed lens, understanding that there's been a lot happening with students over the past 2 months as they're sitting at home. And so that's part of the work that we're doing. I think also it's exciting to hear about the work of the Early Care and Education Initiative and all that's been happening there. And Sharon sits on our steering committee, so she and I are working in tandem in terms of thinking about how the Children's Opportunity Fund can be of help and support with the early care and education challenges moving forward. So through the COVID crisis, the Greater Washington Community Foundation started a COVID response fund, and thus far we've raised over $6 million to support that, and thus far $1 million has come back to Montgomery County. And early care and education is definitely a key piece of what we're thinking about and looking at in that response fund as well. And I'm with you, Hans, in terms of thinking about how do we create this kind of plan of action to address getting back to normal and what we will need in terms of the child care supports for families. I'm at home with a 5 and a 7-year-old, so it is all very real to me. And so we're just excited to be of service and of help to figure out how to get Montgomery County to reopen and be supportive of children and families in Montgomery County. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Dr. Crowell?
So yes, thank you. I think Ms. Resnick talks about this. First of all, I was thinking thanks for the Community Foundation for all of the support and partnership over the years. And I think that this is just another example. The Opportunity Fund is just another example of that partnership. especially around in the ability to bring philanthropic dollars to match and to partner with county funding as well, to create new ideas and new innovations in how we deliver service. I think that this is a time of continuity for us to make sure that we have that what the COF is doing, they can continue to do, but also as we think about this summer and into the fall, how do we manage to come up with new strategies and innovative strategies to get back to what will be a new way of doing business and work. So there, as a partner, I'm looking forward to continuing to work with them, especially around the school age issues and how we get resources and get our children, keep our children learning over the summer and help MCPS to get back to school, as well as helping to work on some of the issues of trauma that are going to be showing up over the summer and into the fall as we go back. So I'm looking forward to continuing to work.
Thank you, Dr. Crowell. And Councilmember Navarro mentioned earlier MMF, which I should have mentioned when we were discussing early childhood and education and care. They have been outstanding leaders in bringing together, in particular, our private sector into this discussion and in this space. Because as we acknowledge, government alone is not going to be able to fill this need. It will truly require a public and private, underscoring private, response to this. And so we will be having discussions moving forward about specifically the role that MMF will continue to play in the facilitation of this important conversation. When we are in a better position to catch our breath, hopefully that will happen sooner rather than later. We will revisit that topic along with a number of others when we can get back to the committee work. But just want to underscore and acknowledge their leadership in this important space and thank them and Sharon and the board and all of the respective members of that outstanding organization for their continued leadership. It's a model for other spaces and other initiatives that I think we can follow moving forward. And with that,
we have
go ahead.
You have a speaker. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. I just quickly wanted to, first of all, say I totally agree with everything that's been said, particularly by Chair Albornoz about the public-private partnership and the efforts that need to continue, and it'll be now needed more than ever before, as we have limited resources and greater needs, and really need to lean on those partnerships. I just had a question of appreciating all the comments that have been made by Councilmember Navarro about being intentional and strategic, also understanding the tremendous work that has been done and the need for those issues. I wasn't clear, honestly, on what the decision point would be on that particular item that was raised. I was just hoping for clarification on that.
Ms. Yao.
So right now, the executive is recommending level funding for the Children's Opportunity Fund, NDA, which is also the continuity of services level. It's $375,000. I believe Ms. Navarro had interest in providing context for how that funding would be used, and certainly we could, put a budget provision that includes that if that's the council's interest in doing that.
That's helpful. I'll yield to Ms. Navarro. I appreciated what she said and just wanted to understand how it was going to be operationalized and how we would move forward.
And I think that Ms. Navarro actually has a motion associated with that. So, Mr. President, we can yield to Ms. Navarro.
Very good. Councilmember Navarro, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. So yes, I would like to move the recommended funding level with the caveat that it would be utilized to enhance existing programs instead of creating new programs. As it was mentioned, a lot of great work has happened and a lot of really wonderful programs. And so what I propose is that we utilize these continuity of operations dollars to continue to provide those amazing services to our youth versus starting new programs.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been seconded by both Councilmember Albornoz and Councilmember Rice at the exact same time. So we're going to say it was Councilmember Albornoz. All those in favor, please.
Mr. President,
Sorry.
can I just ask a question? I'm still on the motion. I'm still not sure. I don't have a problem with it. I think
Just want to understand what it means.
Yeah, I just don't understand what it means. Yeah, that's my. Is that consistent with what Ms. Resnick said about what they're working on, or is it? Maybe I'm just not understanding the point.
Policy group, which is comprised of the superintendent and myself and the executive, and I believe the president of the board, makes decisions about what programs might be adopted with the funding. What I'm recommending is that instead of pursuing new programs where you may, start a total new direction, that we fund those programs that were in place. Councilmember Jawanda, you alluded to some of the literacy efforts, for example, the Dolly Parton program. There's still, some of the Summer Slide program. So that instead of, because we want to pursue continuity of operations, instead of pursuing new initiatives, that we use those funds to actually continue to provide the great kind of programs that have been implemented up until now. And so it would be consistent with our approach right now of not venturing into new things, but actually, and especially in this case, because these are amazing programs, enhancing those if possible, with leveraging private dollars, but not at this time begin to venture into new initiatives and new programs. So that is the motion. It might be that maybe for next year, we then, get a little more ambitious and add more funds to maybe test some new things. But that would be consistent with our original intent, which was to try to scale as much as possible those programs that have had really good outcomes. And in light of what's happening right now, it seems like that would be a really great way to use those dollars.
Thank you.
Councilmember Reamer, did you have anything else to add?
Just to clarify, the items that are described in the memo that we received, those presumably are within the continuity. So it's things that aren't written here today that could be proposed that we would say, listen, not this year. Is that do I have that correct?
Right. So, for example, right now there are programs with the Urban Alliance, some of like Thrive Germantown and things like that, which are doing really amazing. That's really incredible work. The idea is that this will be level funding to continue those programs versus starting to work on some new kind of initiatives. So in other words, it's just consistent with our continuity of operations framework.
So the items that are in the memo are included in continuity, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I have no other speakers. It has been moved by Councilmember Navarro, seconded by Councilmember Albornoz. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. Anyone opposed? No, that carried unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item, since we are skipping item 4, we deferred item 4, we're going to the utilities NDA follow-up, and I believe that's Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I believe this is TNE, no?
Oh.
Vice President Hucker.
I think I made that mistake last time as well, so I'm consistent in my mistakes, but it's still a mistake. Council Vice President Hucker, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. We got into this a little bit and deferred. Why don't I let Mr. Lubchenco remind us where we left things on this?
Sure. Well, the council discussed this item on April 28th, and during that discussion, the council asked DGS staff and council staff to go back and look at the FY21 utilities budget again in light of the savings shown in the third quarterly analysis, as well as the potential impacts of COVID-19 on facilities, perhaps going into FY21. So staff did that, and I do have a revised recommendation based on that discussion. Basically, if you look on the cover sheet, page 2 of the sheet, has the additional reductions recommended by council staff, and they really fall into two parts. First, we looked at the traffic signals and streetlights portion of the utilities NDA, which has experienced some significant surpluses thanks to the high efficiency LED lighting retrofits that I believe Council Vice President Hucker had mentioned at the last meeting. And I looked at the 18 and 19 surpluses and basically split the difference in terms of savings to project for FY21 for that. So there's staff's recommending 300,000 in savings related to that. And then in the buildings portion of the NDA, this is a little bit harder to work through, but staff's also suggesting another 300,000 there. It could come from additional utility savings from the additional COVID-19 impacts into FY21. The department is assuming about $175,000 in savings per month right now with the partial shutdown that we have. Perhaps in the first quarter of next year, we might see some level of savings below that, but that could be one area where those savings could come from. Could also come from some higher than expected building energy performance that you heard from Director Dice last time, that some of their buildings had experienced greater performance benefits than expected. You can't always presume that's going to happen going forward, but that is another area where there could be savings. And then the other factor that's hard to consider is weather. We had a very, very mild winter, which helps tremendously on the energy costs. We presume to project a moderate winter each year in the budget. And however, if we have another lighter winter, that's another place where savings could come from. But all of those combined, staff felt comfortable, given the discussions with DGS staff, of assuming 300,000 in the buildings portion of the NDA. So that would be a combined $600,000 below the executive's recommendation. The executive's recommendation was slightly below the FY20 budget. So combined, the savings would be, as noted on the first page of the cover sheet, the reduction from FY20 would be about $731,582. So staff is recommending that as a revised recommendation to be responsive to the council's inquiries from the last meeting.
Council Vice President?
Mr. Dice, do you have anything to add or object to on this?
No objections. OMB staff, DGS staff, and Mr. Lipchenko, as he mentioned, did discuss this. We have looked at it. There are a number of assumptions employed, but I think based on what we're seeing, and none of us hope to actually have savings resulting from closed buildings because of the extended COVID, but based on what those things we can manage, we're comfortable with this.
Okay, this is terrific, Keith. I move the staff recommendation.
Thank you. It's been moved by Council Vice President Hucker. Is there a second? It's been seconded by Councilmember Reamer. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We are back from recess. We apologize for any of the inconveniences and everything associated with that. What we're going to have to do is start this topic over again. We're going to go back in the same order that we did before. Councilmember Navarro will lead it off. Then we're going to hear from Gene Smith. Then we're going to go back to Councilmember Navarro. Then we're going to hear from Councilmember Reamer, which is where we left off. Councilmember Friedson and Councilmembers Glass are on the list, and you will be on the list just as you were before. And Councilmember Navarro did make a motion, and Councilmember Friedson seconded it. So we're going to have that as well when it comes up. So with that, Councilmember Navarro, would you like to have a repeat of what you did, please?
Yes, sir. So this is item number 6. So last Thursday, the council unanimously supported setting the real property tax revenues at the charter limit, and a majority of the council supported the income tax offset credit at $692. In previous years, these actions were sufficient for finance staff to calculate the tax rates for the coming fiscal year. It has come to the council's attention, however, that the executive's recommended budget sets the real property tax revenues using a different method than prior years. This means that there are two possible rates that finance could generate, not one like previous years. Council staff has prepared a report discussing the alternative interpretation that the executive used when calculating the charter limit. Included in the staff report are tables detailing the differences in revenues and tax rates based on a 30-year history for calculating the charter limit and the executive's proposed interpretation. Council staff will provide additional details about this report momentarily, but I wanted to highlight that the charter gives the council ultimate authority to set the levies on revenues. Therefore, the council must take an additional step today to clarify the total amount of real property tax revenues that it will levy at the charter limit today. I will now turn it over to Mr. Smith to briefly highlight items from his report.
Thank you, Ms. Navarro. So as I shared previously, we're gonna get into the weeds of the charter limit today. As you noted, the council ultimately needs to set the revenues as it does every year, and so that's going to be the conversation on the real property tax revenues. The charter stipulates how the real property tax revenues are calculated each year in terms of the estimated revenues received from property taxes, as well as the percentage growth in the consumer price index. That calculation gives you what we call the charter limit, because that's the threshold limit before the council needs 9 affirmative votes or all council members sitting affirmative votes to raise the levies above that. There are a few items that are excluded in the charter that are not needed to be included in the charter limit each year, and that's the conversation point for us today. Previously, the Department of Finance has included only the actual property tax revenues from new construction included in that. And Mr. Elrich is proposing, has only included actual property tax revenues. On page 2, you can see the calculations of what happens. Each year, the State Department of Assessments will do quarterly bills for new construction. And as I shared earlier, it's about a 60-40 split. The county will only collect about 60% of the total property tax revenues that could have been collected on new construction because of these quarterly bills, the 3/4, half, and 1/4. The other 40% is not collected because the properties were not online for the full year. What Mr. Elrich is proposing is to include that 40% back into the base calculation for the charter limit. And for this year, what that means is about $5.2 million extra in the total revenues the county can levy. And again, as council staff notes on page 3 for the tables, that includes about a 1/4 of a penny increase per $100 of assessed base in the property tax rates for fiscal 21 compared to what they would have been under the 30-year history. Council staff prepared not an exhaustive list, but some questions in terms of how this new method compares to the old method. The first question is, does this new method impact newly constructed properties? The answer is no, it does not impact newly constructed properties. Those will continue to get quarterly bills as they always have, and will pay taxes for that, whatever part of the year that they were online, and they will be folded into the tax rolls for next year. How does the executive's interpretation impact existing property owners? As noted, all existing property owners will be paying about a 1/4 of a penny increase this year. And then as long as this method is continued to use, we'll be paying a slightly higher tax rate each year to make up whatever that 40% difference is each year for the revenues that were not collected from newly constructed properties. Council staff does take a few minutes to talk briefly of are the terms in the charter revenues immutable? The actual variables used, estimated real property taxes and percentage growth in the consumer price index, are clearly stated in the charter. There may be some ambiguity in terms of whether revenues, newly constructed property means just revenues collected, or means all the revenues that could have been collected, as Mr. Elrich is proposing. And council staff notes that given how residents excluded these properties from the charter, there may be some reasonable sense to argue that including the total revenues makes sense. However, for the last 30 years, finance has been applying it based on actual revenues, and that is also an equally valid interpretation from the charter. So finally, the council question was whether will the council be exceeding the charter limit this year if they approve the county executive's proposed interpretation. And that answer is based on whether the council believes the county executive's interpretation is a valid use of the, or a valid interpretation of the charter. If you decide to interpret that it is, then you would not be exceeding the charter limit. If you choose to not, sorry, I was getting interrupted. If you choose to set it based on the 30-year-old method, but want to retain the revenues that Mr. Elrich had proposed, you would need to, we recommend, Mr. Drummer and I recommend that you would vote that you would be exceeding the charter limit in order to do that. So that is the question before the council today, is do you agree with Mr. Elrich's interpretation of the charter to set the levy, real property levies, or do you wish to set the real property levies based on the 30-year history? Thank you, Ms. Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. So before I turn it over to you, Mr. President, I would like to move that the council set real property tax revenues at the charter limit using the same methodology the county has used for the last 30 years. As the council has reiterated time and time again during this budget process, our residents and businesses deserve continuity in our budget. This is particularly important when it comes to proposed changes to such an important item as the county's tax revenues. Alterations to the charter limit methodology require detailed review and thorough public discourse, possibly even a charter amendment. Before the council adopts a change like this, I think that we should take our time to deliberate. Thank you, and that is a motion.
Thank you, and I have a motion, and it was seconded by Councilmember Friedson, just like Groundhog Day. Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Councilmember Reamer.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you to the chair for her motion and her explanation of the issue. This is a very, there's a lot here. I guess I want to start by saying this is not about the details of mathematical formulas. It's not really about the amount of money that we're talking about here. This is about our values and our approach to government. And that's where my concern comes from. I do not share the view that in a different world we would calculate the property tax base in this manner. Perhaps we would, but the charter clearly prescribes how the property tax base will be calculated, and it does not allow for us to do it as the executive branch is recommending. The reason why I am so concerned about this proposal is because I really think it flies in the face of our approach to good government and to transparency. And that is really my concern in this moment. The charter says that we are allowed to calculate the tax base based on revenues that we've already collected. We cannot do it based on an estimate of revenues that we would collect in a year. It's what we have collected. And the problem with this proposal is it seeks to take a full year's value of the construction of new property when on average we only get 60% of that value. By substituting a hypothetical amount for the actual amount, that no longer provides a sound basis for the calculation of our property tax base. The problem with that is if we were to move forward on this basis, we would be very open to legal challenge. And if that challenge did not come in the first year, it might come in the second year or the third year or the fourth year or the fifth year. It's $5 million this year. It could be another 5, could be more next year. It could be less, could be more any given year, but it would keep adding up. And at some point, someone would challenge us. And to me, the plain reading of the charter does not allow for the proposed method. So there is a tremendous amount of risk in this proposal. And it's a risk that, we've already been through having to repay Wynn as a result of the Wynn case, millions and millions of dollars in income tax rebates. So why we would want to proceed with a new strategy similar to that using our property tax base is beyond me. The fundamental issue here is, given how risky it is, the fact that the county council and even more importantly, the public was not informed of this proposal is highly problematic. If you look at the county executive's budget, you will not find an explanation of this decision. It's not there. The county executive did not present a budget explaining this method of calculation. The fact is, it is a $5 million increase in property taxes from all payers of property taxes in the county. But there's no explanation of that in the county's budget. It is unthinkable to me that we would have a tax increase that has not actually been transparently presented to the community. And what more, is actually illegal. It is a violation of the charter. The combination of those two aspects of this proposal are just profoundly troubling. And so I support the motion. I do think we have to reject it. It's not about the money. This is not an anti-tax thing. This is about good government and transparent decision-making. And I really think it was a profound mistake to include this in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to build upon that. I'll try to be as brief as I can. I share in the deep concerns about this proposal, not just for the thought process and the public debate that could have happened and should have happened but didn't happen, but in the process of putting this forward in the manner in which it did. Public policy means public input, and we cannot have transparent and accountable policy making unless there are transparent and accountable decisions for how we make those decisions, how we calculate the policies that we make. The council determines tax policy, and the public is able to see transparently and accountably how we do our work, the people's work. And that is not the manner in which this was proposed forward, to recalculate 30 years of precedent without a significant public debate and a transparent and thoughtful conversation with public input is deeply disturbing and very troubling to me as a lifelong Montgomery County resident. It is simply not the way that we do business here. It is not the manner in which we have handled our work in government, a place where most people believe in government. And this does not, I believe, help to add trust to the manner in which we do government. This was not put forward in a transparent way prior to public hearings about the budget, about the tax decisions that the county executive has made. And this is one further example of the very difficult circumstances with which this council has had to step up in this very challenging environment. The property tax increase is $65 million that we've had to find. Understandable that that is a public policy disagreement that we've had in a transparent way. We can have an honest disagreement about that, and I can respect that, but we've had to address that. This is about $5.2 million on top of that. The tax offset is $1.8 million in addition to that. Again, a policy decision that we can debate. And then there was the $10 million negative appropriation that we were told very clearly by our council attorney and by our council staff we're not legally allowed to pass. So it was a budget that was not balanced when it was sent over, put us in a very difficult and challenging situation, which was exacerbated and continues to be even more of a challenge based on the public health and economic crisis that we find ourselves in. And I am hopeful that we can vote this down and move on with our work, and hope that the process with which this was put forward is never repeated again.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to start by trying to help frame this and understand this a little bit better. So, Mr. Smith, are you there? Yes, I see you there. When the budget was presented to the council, did the county executive or anyone on his staff explain that the budget included this new calculation?
I did not read anything published that this was included.
So then how did you and others help discover this calculation?
Council staff was in conversation with the executive staff about different elements in the budget. And then as the council saw during its Thursday review of the tax rates did increase after setting it at 692 and the charter limit, which typically does not happen. when assessments increase, and that raised more questions. And that's where we went from there.
Okay. So it was through discussion with executive staff as the budget process has been moving forward.
Correct.
Okay. So let's turn it over to executive staff. I see Mr. Madaleno and Covio on with us. I don't know which of you would prefer to take the lead, but I'll ask the question, simple, straightforward question. Why did you decide to make this change?
You're on mute, Rich. Still on mute. There
All right, there you go. I'm sorry, I forgot that I'm the one that has to unmute myself. The county executive discussed this in all of his public forums during the fall, that his belief that the charter, both the need for us to change the charter, because the existing charter provision about the revenue cap is debilitating for county government, for county services. And if you think this year is bad, next year with potentially negative inflation will be even worse, and it will make the public think we have a problem that we don't, because of the rules and not because of some underlying economic condition. The executive wanted to do this because he believes that by not counting that 40%, remember to reiterate what Mr. Smith said, that 40% is not going to be, another bill isn't being sent out to those taxpayers, but by not counting that additional 40%, you are, in the following year, you are inadvertently setting the property tax rate too low because of the way the interplay between last year's revenues and next year's estimated tax base. So he believes that this is the correct way to have new construction pay totally for its enhancement to the overall tax base. We would have, obviously the council staff got the letter from the county attorney in early March. The GO committee had a scheduled briefing for this on April 29th before all council committees were canceled. The executive would have brought this up at the breakfast on March 16th. It was part of his remarks that got canceled because of the whole situation. So it's been an unusual year. Councilmember Reamer is correct that in the final iteration of the budget book, the piece that explained this was taken out for revision and did not make it back in before it went to the printer. For that, I am profoundly sorry, but other than that, there would have been deep conversation. And of course, many of you have heard the county executive say over and over that he thinks the charter interpretation is wrong and has been talking about that for months.
Sure. And so it's unfortunate that the deep conversation is being had the week the budget is to be approved. I think there's universal agreement on that statement. And I attended a number of the executives' budget forums, fondly remembering the days when we could gather and talk about policies and civic life and all that stuff. But while he shares a lot of different opinions at those types of forums, to say something in a forum but then not convey it to the council, or not to, as you noted, not to even include the cover page in the budget for whatever reason, is a problem, as you've heard and will probably continue to hear from any of my colleagues that follow me. But I just want to pick up on the point that you said, just so I understand the policy correct, that the way we are currently calculating property taxes and assessing them, new construction is not fully adding its true value to the base of our property assessment. Is that correct?
That is the executive's interpretation.
Okay. With regard to the property assessment, because they're done quarterly, do you think that this is a point in time where we should revisit our arrangement with the State Department of Assessment and Taxation to possibly bring it back in-house so we can have more control over this process?
So assessments are done on a triennial basis, right? The billing for new construction is done quarterly. So that's why you wind up with a situation where someone gets a 75%, 50%, a quarter, or 25% bill for new construction. So I don't know if that, if we were to have control over the system of assessments, I don't know if we would be able to charge someone the property tax for the full year if they've only had the ability to occupy a facility or a home for 4 months. So even if you had that control, I don't know if you would change the way the billing happens in the first year, but I do think it makes sense that the entire value get added to the entire value of the bill get added to the revenue side, because the entire value of the property gets added to the valuation side.
Sure.
So since this is it's two variables that come up with the property limit, I think both sides of this equation should have new construction fully added. Right now, it's fully added to the one part of the calculation, the assessable base. It is not fully added to the revenue side. And that creates in itself a different sort, minuscule, because we're talking about small amounts, small, but still an inequity to every other taxpayer in the jurisdiction.
Right. Well, thank you for that. The reason I wanted to ask the question is so that everybody who's paying attention to this conversation understand why you made these decisions and what it is exactly we're talking about. Mr. Cuvier, let me just turn it over to you real quick. During your confirmation hearing, I brought up this topic with SSTAT towards the end, and it was very brief. But now that this conversation has been forced upon us, let me just ask you quite simply: when we're doing assessments on homes, what is the assessed value, the property tax? What is the percentage of the assessed value that homeowners in Montgomery County are paying? And let me put it a different way. We have homes that have been built for 50 years, 90 years, 100 years, and then homes that are brand new, quote unquote new construction. With relation to each other, are they all paying the same rates in property taxes?
Well, no, they don't all pay the same rates because there are multiple tax classes around the county.
Let me rephrase that. Same percentage of their assessed worth.
Well, for a property that isn't new construction, they're all paying on 100% of their assessed value, yes.
What was the first part of your statement?
For anything that's not new construction, which is 99+%.
Right, so, yes. What we're talking about here is new construction. That's this entire conversation. So what percentage are they paying on their rates?
If we're only talking about new construction, we're talking about a very small part of the tax base, and they're paying on the portion of the assessed value that is in use during that 1 year where it is new construction. So if it's a $100,000 property and it was brought in the first quarter of the fiscal year, it would be taxed at 75% of that $100,000 or $75,000. If it was brought in the semi-annual, or not the semi-annual, but in the half-year billing or the half-year supplemental bill, then it would be brought in at 50% for that 1 year. And then if it was brought in the third quarter of the year, it would be brought in as 1 quarter, so 25%.
So you're saying that they catch up in the subsequent years so that there's parity 100%?
Well, eventually they'll pay on the full value of the full assessed value of the property, either the next year or the following year. Yes.
Okay. I knew that there's a lag, and I've seen some data that suggests that that they're not fully caught up even after that second year or once those cycles complete themselves. But again, what I'll say, I'll conclude in this way. There's a lot to talk about here. You know, I think this is a really important conversation because at its core, what we're talking about is having a fair and equitable process for evaluating our property values. That's it. And as was just noted, it's a fact that newer homes are not paying the same percentage as other homes throughout the county. And that's the reality. And so we should have another conversation about our policies. We need to have a conversation about any big policy change, which underscores the point that in the last week of the budget, having a conversation about this at this point in time is not the way to go about it. I wish the executive had come to us early on and said, within the confines of this FY21 budget, here's something I'd like to talk about. And it's an important conversation to talk about, just not in the last week of this budget when we're dealing with so many other issues, namely life and death in our community, trying to make sure everybody is healthy and safe. So with that, I'll be supporting the motion and look forward to a future conversation about creating fair and equitable taxing policies in Montgomery County. I yield back. Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thanks. Well, I need to clear something up here because Mr. Madaleno implied that by making this change, somehow developers would be paying their fair share. That is not what this is about at all. Developers will pay their assessed tax.
I didn't say anything about developers, and you're correct. This is not about developers because in the end, it is the property owner who pays the tax when the occupancy permit is built. So if you're building...
Yeah, the property owner is going to pay their tax based on getting it assessed. This is about how large is next year's tax base that we are setting rates to. And when you include the full value of...
This is not about the tax base. This is about the revenue calculation for
Yeah, well, fine.
The tax base fully includes the new construction.
Let me finish. Let me finish.
If you can just have one person speak, please. Go ahead.
This is about the amount of revenue that we are using to estimate our target for next year's property tax rates. Correct. And when you include a full year's value of the construction, it means that that amount is larger. And so when we set the rates, we set higher rates for next year. So it's everybody else that pays more when this method is used. The tax increase falls across the entire population of taxpayers, everybody. Again, I want to say, I would, if this had been the way it was done because the charter allowed it 30 years ago, you know, that would be fine. The charter does not allow us to do it this way. And the implication of not doing it this way is not that somehow one group of people is getting away with something or shifting the burden to another group of people. It doesn't have that consequence. It just means that all taxpayers pay a little bit less from year to year if revenue is kept at the charter limit. So including this is a way of allowing the county to collect a little bit more revenue. Again, what the distinction here is the county executive's proposal for the property tax increase for education was very public. You know, he presented it, he argued for it, he's still arguing for it. Right or wrong, that's the way we're supposed to conduct our affairs. This one was just conducted, it's not written. It is also a $5 million tax increase on all payers, regardless of its rationale or justification. And it was not presented. and it is clearly in violation of the charter. So it is, you know, not only was it lacking transparency, but it is illegal. So, you know, but again, I just want to clear up because there's some confusion. This does not shift the burden from one group or another group. The executive is not helping one group of people at the expense of another group of people. It's simply raising the assessed, the amount that all payers will pay by a small but meaningful amount, $5 million this year, presumably a similar amount next year, and every year so on after, depending on the amount of construction.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. I just wanted to expound on that very quickly, just to simplify things in terms and ask Mr. Smith, since you were the one, thankfully, who identified some of these issues and some of the discrepancies with the tax rate. What we were told before is 60% of new construction approximately is calculated as part of the revenues, with which the charter limit is determined as part of the predetermined formula. That means that 40% is not calculated as part of that base. That's what we're talking about here from a policy issue, whether that's right or wrong, whether that's how it could be or not. Who pays for the 40% if we were to charge 100% of that property? Who would bear the cost in terms of taxpayers?
All taxpayers on the rolls for fiscal. So in fiscal 20, let's say you collected 60% of the construction revenues on average. 40% gets added. Everybody that has a property and paying property taxes in 21 will pay that extra 40%.
So the additional value that we are currently not calculating as part of the revenue to determine the charter limit, which dictates property taxes in the county, would be borne by taxpayers, not by the individual property owners of the individual properties. So the $5.17 million here and any subsequent amount related to that same amount would be borne by all taxpayers, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I think that's an important clarification for everybody to be able to make. I just have one follow-up question for Mr. Madaleno. You mentioned a document sent over to the council in March discussing this particular change, and I just wanted to see if you wanted to expound further on that.
It was advice that was provided to the county executive by the county attorney that was shared with Mr. Drummer and Mr. Smith.
Those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Albernaz.
Thank you. I share the concern of my colleagues regarding process, and while it is undeniably true that the county executive did articulate this concern and his interest in doing something like this through the budget planning sessions that they had in so many different communities, you know, we didn't find out about it until fairly recently, as has been noted. And so I am going to support the amendment because I do think that this is a discussion that we need to have. But there are a number of key policy elements here that are yet to be answered, and we need to have a deliberative conversation about those policy angles before I would feel comfortable moving something like this forward. So I appreciate the effort to be creative. I respect that, but at the same notion, have concerns with the process, and we'll be supporting the amendment, and so that we can have this discussion at a later time.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to say the same thing that Councilmember Albornoz did. I think that, again, it's process, it's about notification, making sure that people are aware. And so from that perspective, again, I'll be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, as will I. Councilmember Reamer.
Thanks. Well, I'd like to follow up on the mention that was made of the memo, the legal advice on this issue. I'd like to ask Bob Drummer, the council attorney, for his view on the risk as far as the legal standing of this proposal.
Good afternoon. You know, when you give a legal opinion, you're basically making a prediction of what the courts will do. It's helpful to have what prior courts have done in the same situation. We don't have that here. You're looking at language and interpreting it. The language you're looking at says this limit being the charter limit, does not apply to revenue from newly constructed property. The first thing a court would look at would be, well, what's the plain meaning of that? My thought was the plain meaning is actual revenue received. But if you argue that maybe it means, revenue that you will receive, over the full year, and then you could argue it's ambiguous, the court would then look at, well, what other information do we have? And you have two things that I think are important. One is, and not necessarily in this order, but one is that the people, the county that has been living with this charter for 30 years has interpreted it to mean actual revenue for 30 years. That must mean something, that's the way it was looked at. And then secondly, and I wasn't working for the county 30 years ago, but when the charter amendment came in, the purpose of this amendment was to restrict the property tax rate that the county could raise, could levy, and keep it down. So looking at it from that viewpoint, you'd have to say, well, if the people that wrote this were trying to hold down tax rates, they would probably have meant actual revenue and not potential revenue. So, my opinion is it's not free from doubt, but I think, the courts would probably rule that that the way the county's been doing it.
Sorry, can you say that again? I lost you, that last sentence you just said.
Someone's
hiding his fiber net, trying to prevent discussion.
My opinion is that the courts, if asked, the Court of Appeals, if asked, would ultimately rule, for all the reasons I explained, that this provision means actual revenue received during the relevant year for newly constructed property, and not the potential revenue you could have received had everything been online for a full year.
Right, and this is not the first time this issue has come up over the years. There's been many attempts by administrations to consider whether this shift could be made. I think everyone looks at this and says the plain language of the charter is unavoidable, inescapable, much as we might wish it to be otherwise. This is what it is. It doesn't mean it's rational, doesn't mean it's what we would want it to be, but it is what it is. That's been the posture of the county government for 30 years. And that's why it has never changed. So, you've expressed your concern about how strong this position would be, and the inverse of that is it's very subject to legal challenge. So if the council were to approve it, we could easily end up court. Frankly, the best thing we could hope for would be to go to court immediately and to have this issue resolved, because otherwise that $5 million keeps adding up every year. And then 5 years from now, we owe $25–30 million. And then we lose a case and we got to send out refund checks to that same amount, which is, by the way, impossible for people 5 years ago who might have left. What a mess. What a mess. And for the county executive to just include this without a plan, without any real engagement, without knowing how this would all play out, is just very disappointing.
Okay, Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to add that I have, incredible respect for the finance department. I have, over the years, gotten to see them, front seat row as we prepare for our meetings with the rating agencies and how thorough they all are. I was surprised when I first heard the executive make a comment about this particular issue, because again, I have extraordinary respect for the group of professionals in the finance department who have been calculating this particular item in a particular way, including those who preceded them. So I think it's important to note that. I also want to point out that, we all last year, I think all of us had conversations about particular fiscal policies that we wanted to examine and we wanted to be very deliberate about, because, these are very important and structural changes. And of course, we all know that the pandemic hit and a lot of things were appended, but it doesn't mean that we should somehow shortcut these deliberations and somehow move ahead with incorporating such tremendous policy changes into a budget. And so to me, that was also part of my discomfort is the fact that there are a number of fiscal policy changes baked into this budget that we had not had an opportunity to fully vet. And so again, I think that for all of those reasons, I made the motion, and glad to hear that I think my colleagues agree. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other speakers on the list. Does anybody else want to speak before we vote? We have a motion by Councilmember Navarro, seconded by Councilmember Friedson. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much. I have nothing else on the agenda, though I did want to, Mr. Howard, are you on the call? Greg? Yeah, I see you are.
Yes, sir.
Can you update us on when we will take up the community grants?
Yes, so the current plan is, after some discussions today, is to take that up on Wednesday. Will be the best day to make sure we have all the information that council members need for that issue.
Okay, does everybody hear that? At this moment, we're taking it up on Wednesday. Head shaking, yes. At this moment, we're taking it up on Wednesday. Okay. And with that, thank you all very much for being with us. We are adjourned. Thanks.